Hello, everyone. You're here with Chris and Bronte. We'll be introducing ourselves in just a minute for gender, parenthood, and career choices, an Australian perspective. And you can probably tell that the Australian is not me. So first, to let you know that you are all muted because there's many of you on the line, and it would probably be a glorious noise if you all were unmuted. Bronte and I are gonna introduce ourselves, then we're gonna turn our videos off and begin the presentation. If you did not get the worksheet in an email, if you had registered by Monday, do look over in your little participant screen, and you should have it as a handout so you can access that. And if you can't hear me or there's weird sounds, please put something in the chat function and we'll try to fix it. Right. Can you tab through that, Bronte?
Tab through the presentation, sorry, yep.
There we go. So there we are.
Oh.
Do you want to introduce yourself first?
Sure. Are we going to switch? We'll keep the cameras on for now?
Yeah, let's just keep them on for the introduction
and
then we'll turn them off.
Yeah. So it's afternoon your time, morning Australian time. I'm Bronte Nealand. I'm a mother of two elementary school daughters. I'm renowned for always saying yes and probably overcommitting myself to too many things. I suffer from working mother's guilt, which at times my two pretty savvy young daughters like to exploit. My husband has limited English, so we're really clearly defined as to who does what in the household. And I guess I couldn't be in the role that I'm in, which is Director of International, without the support of my husband and my family and my parents, and also what I refer to as my village, which I'll talk about a little later. My running and my sport keeps me sane. It's probably the only time I really have me time. And over my 12 years at Victoria University, I've probably been full-time as long as I've been part-time. So it's probably quite unique. So I'm looking forward to speaking to you all today. Thank you.
Hi, and I get to host Bronte, and it's just been a delight working with her and her great knowledge of this subject. I too am a mom of two, but two young men who are now in their 20s, which makes me feel very old to say that. I remember the days well when they were young. One's in college, one just graduated. I've worked at CIS abroad for 11 years and almost 2 as president. And I also remember feeling very guilty when the kids were younger and I would leave them to travel, but then I would come back and be so refreshed and so present when I was with them, and that made all the difference. My husband is a better cook, a more thorough cleaner, and definitely more organized than I am, so he insisted we divvy up all the duties. I learned from my own experience the importance of flexible hours, the importance of trust, and a work culture that doesn't penalize women or men for being awesome parents. I think that there can be a lot of win-wins in that space. So that's my story. And now we're going to turn our videos off and keep going.
Okay.
All right, so the Global Leadership League, which is how all of you are members or soon to be members, is a newer group in the field of international education. And our mission is to ignite change across the global education landscape by empowering, connecting, and training women leaders. And so far we have 300 members and 17 groups who have joined, and it's really exciting for me to be a part of this journey. And certainly there's a lot of conversations happening around the US and in higher education. So the theme of the year is influence. We decided this over the summer. And really looking at influence as the capacity to have an effect either on something or someone. And you, as members of the League, have heard this theme echoed through all of our offerings this year, and will continue to hear that. And at the end, I'll talk to you a little bit more about some of the events that we have coming up in February and March that you may be able to partake in.
So we'll move into the presentation now, Gender, Parenthood and Career Choices, an Australian Perspective. Firstly, I really want to acknowledge the contributions of Alyssa Newell and Rob McDonald. We all co-presented at the Australian International Education Conference on this theme last year, and a lot of the content is, or the majority of the content is from that session. It was actually at that session that Corey, a member of the GLL, attended, and it was through that that I was introduced to Chris and had this fantastic opportunity. So just a quick overview of what we'll try and cover today. We'll cover some statistics. I do try and keep things relatively light. We'll talk about some of the challenges, some of the reality and how you just need to, I guess, manage your own expectations and those of others. The different stages, and that's really about the different stages of your children, and then obviously the benefits of having working parents employed in your organisation. So firstly, some basic data, and I've just picked out Australia, the US and the UK here, and looking at the World Economic Forum's 2016 Gender Gap Report. And what's really interesting is both the US and Australia perform really well in terms of educational attainment, but we're ranking, mid-40s for overall gender equality. And a lot of the results, or those results, are really because of the low levels of economic participation by females in those economies, as well as the low political empowerment. Interestingly enough, the UK performs better overall, even though the educational attainment is quite a lot lower. But that's mainly because of their high ranking in political empowerment. What's always interesting, I think, is to look at leave provisions and how governments support parental leave. And so in Australia, we actually have up to 18 weeks leave paid for at the national minimum wage by the federal government. And then on top of that, and just because of the audience, I've pulled out or highlighted university funded leave. And we're very fortunate, I think, in Australia that many universities probably pay about 6 months leave. The university I work at currently pays up to 9 months full-time pay at your level, in addition to the government funded leave. So you literally do get a full year's of pay. The US, which you will all be more familiar with, while there is some university can fund leave for up to 12 weeks, there is no government funding. And the US is the only advanced economy that does not mandate paid leave of any kind, whether that's sick or maternity leave. So it is quite, I think, obviously a different challenge that you face there. I understand that your family medical leave allows for up to 12 weeks of unpaid leave to take care of family members, but you're certainly not in the situation that both the UK and Australia are in. So the UK as well enjoys up to 39 weeks of paid leave. And I do understand also that there is some universities also will pay some leave on top of that. So I think for the UK, it's about 90% of your average weekly earnings before tax for the first 6 weeks. And then it's a set amount, or 90%, whichever is the lower, for the next 33 weeks. What I thought was interesting when we're looking at preparing this presentation was the participation rates of employment by single mothers and also mothers that are part of a couple, and looking at it across the different stages or the different age groups. What I think is slightly alarming is to see that the rate of participation in full-time work since 1991, pretty much across all of the groups, has not changed drastically over the years. I think it has for and that's in full-time, so in the red. The part-time has changed a reasonable amount over that time, and I think it's encouraging to see that change occurring. I think it's really only in the 12 to 17 years that you have single mothers engaging in full-time work at a similar rate to mothers who are part of a couple. And I think that just highlights the additional challenges that single mothers have and their ability to actually juggle both work and family. I found this statistic very interesting, and it is an Australian perspective, but only 3% of the Australian population are women working full-time with a husband as the primary carer. So we are still very much in that mode or that model where it's either both parents working or the mother is the primary carer. In terms of household work, and this was some data from the OECD, women are still overwhelmingly spending more time doing housework than men. So 273 minutes per day as opposed to men. And I really liked this quote, and I think it's really true for many of us, where it says Australian women respond to earning more than their husbands by increasing their housework as if to make up for the gender deviance of female breadwinning and their husbands' dependence on this. And this was from a study that was actually published in the American Journal of Sociology. So while in the cases where females are actually earning more than their husbands, there seems to be this guilt attached to it, and we go back into, I guess, some of the stereotypical roles or gender roles that we feel that we should play. As many of you probably know, juggling a career and family is really challenging, and it's challenging for a number of reasons. You have competing priorities. You can't be everywhere. Your work impacts on your family impacts on your work. You've got the emotional toll. You feel stressed. You never seem to have enough time to do anything, whether that's at work or whether it's at home. You feel guilt, and I think that Chris and I both talked about that. You feel guilt, particularly if you're in roles that require you to travel and you're absent, and you miss out on different milestones. And you're kind of always anxious around, is everything running smoothly? Are the kids okay? Have you missed deadlines? And you just never quite, I think, at a nice balance. Or I think you can be. I think you just really need to be quite conscious of hitting that balance. Then there are the negative perceptions in your workplace that you've got sick children and you're away from the office, or from other parents at the schools that you're missing school events, or that unlike other people you might have restricted office hours. It doesn't mean you're doing any less, but sometimes it's that visibility that people judge you on and when you're actually in the office. And then obviously you've got the challenges of discrimination, that glass ceiling that at a certain point you just seem not to be able to progress. And the resistance to flexibility that still occurs in many workforces. And there is 1 in 3 parents that actually do report, and this goes back into this, the conflicting priorities, report that there is a conflict between their work and their family roles. And a quote from Annabelle Crabb, who's an Australian political journalist and commentator, and I reference her possibly another time. She's got a great book that is referenced at the end, which is called The Wife Drought. It actually talks about how every working woman actually needs a wife to kind of manage all the jobs that you tend to take on as a mother. But it's saying, working mothers should work as if one didn't have children, while raising one's children as if one didn't have a job, and to do any less feels like failing at both. And I think, a lot of that pressure we can put on ourselves, but there's societal expectations as well. And for me, that quote just really rang true, and I reflected on that in terms of and how I operate. And just some other quotes. In preparing this last year, the three of us actually, or a similar presentation, went out to all of our networks and asked for comments. So if you see any quotes throughout this presentation, it's from our colleagues in Australia working in international education at universities. One saying, when I perform well at work, this normally comes at the expense of my family. Or if for people working part-time, I ended up working from home on my days off and felt under pressure from every side, stressed that I was missing deadlines and guilty that when I'm working, I want to be spending time with my baby. Then I think it's really interesting again around the perceptions of flexible work and the impact that that can have on your career. And Hayes, HR company in Australia and possibly in the US, released a gender diversity report in 2017. And what that showed is that men absolutely believe that it's career limiting for men to work flexibly. But women actually felt that it wasn't as much of an issue for men as the men saw it to be. But overwhelmingly, women, 73% of women said that working flexibly is a career limiting move for women, but not so much for men. And in Australia, 52% of working mothers in Australia say they've been discriminated against. And a lot of this presentation, we're going to really focus on the positives and the proactive work that you can do or actions you can take. But I still think it's really important to recognise that, while we may have fantastic leave entitlements in Australia, there is still that discrimination that appears to be occurring or felt, certainly. And here are some quotes that highlight that. After approaching my previous boss to have an open conversation about my career, she told me that it'd be impossible to do her job with kids. And I think the thing about this quote for me as well is, all of us need to be supporting each other in this journey. And what you can concerningly hear more than you'd like to is that women can actually be the toughest critics of fellow women, and people sometimes forget or think, well, I had to do it the hard way, so should they. And I think that we need to kind of be supporting everyone on this journey. Another quote, I've been discriminated against for more senior roles, especially those that involve travel. People assume that because I'm a mother, I'm not as flexible or available. So I think what's really important is to keep it real. One of the things I've come to accept is you cannot have it all. And so you just need to make some decisions as what's important. So for me, I'd love a fantastically tidy house. That's just not going to happen because I would prefer to spend my time at home doing other things. Some people have in the fortunate position that they can outsource things. So they might be able to get a cleaner in, or they might be able to have someone look after their kids so they can work longer hours. But I think you always need to put that under what I call the pressure test and just check that it's really worth the added stress. So for myself, while I work full time, I don't have a cleaner because I don't know about in the US, but we seem to clean for the cleaners here in Australia. So you try and spend the morning running around trying to tidy your house so the cleaner can clean. And I just don't participate in that. I've decided it's too stressful that time. And I think looking at just focus on the quality and not the quantity. And I think that's ultimately what your children will remember. And we've talked about it, guilt. So this quote, I acknowledge that it's my decision in how I manage and mitigate it, but sometimes it does creep up on you. So accept that you will feel guilty. And then I think you just need to really start from the beginning. I think you need to let go. You need to empower people, sometimes expect more from people. Play to your strengths. So Chris talked about how her husband does all the cooking, cleaning. My husband does all the cooking in our house. And so I just like this, advice. It can also help from this to start from the beginning and to just divide up recurrent and non-critical chores, even if that means becoming a little more tolerant of stuff lying around. And also sometimes simply leaving the house without preparing everything beforehand and not feeling guilty about it. a role reversal can often be more effective than confrontation. And I think it is that. Sometimes you just need to let things go and work out what's really worth being concerned about. I'm not going to read this whole quote, but I was really impressed that this person actually went to this detail of having the conversation and working out when they travelled what the situation would be if an emergency occurs while they're travelling and so forth. And I think it shows a really good way for some people to assure themselves that everything is in place. And I think a role that's often hidden, but I think is really important, is what we Lucky Orange Pants called the keeper. And it's the keeper of the schedules, the keeper of understanding the rituals and the memories, the person in the family who's ensuring that everyone's reminded of everything, that we understand how each child needs to respond to different situations and how you need to prepare them. And I think this kind of emotional, and no one can actually see this work, takes an emotional toll on us that we just need to acknowledge, and acknowledge that all of this, keeping on track and keeping everyone in the household as happy as they can be, is actually quite a bit of work. And someone that you will all be more familiar with than myself, but certainly from Australia, I think many of us find her inspirational, is that we need to do a better job. So Michelle Obama, we need to do a better job of putting ourselves higher on our own to-do list. Just do what works for you, because there will always be someone who thinks differently. And I think that's both of those pieces of advice are really important. And I was heard about, I think it's Gillian Giles, who was one of the trainers on The Biggest Loser in the US. I was reading on Thrive, Arianna Huffington's social media, about how she sets up herself 12 hours each week that is just for her. So whether that's her exercise, whether it's her appointments, whether it's going out for dinner, and something like that for myself, I think is quite attainable, to say, okay, 12 hours, I will find 12 hours in the week.
That's a great idea. Bronte, I wanted to tell you, Kenneth, who has joined us, wanted to offer a quote that said, "You can have it all, just not at the same time."
Absolutely. Absolutely. It will come at some stage. Absolutely agree. And I think, the oxygen mask for me is also a really good analogy, that you need to look after yourself, and you need to make sure that you're healthy, that emotionally you're in a good place, that you've got everything sorted, because often if it's yourself that's unraveling, or your partner, it makes it really challenging to help others and to help your children. And I think you've also always got to be mindful and really open with your children around how they're feeling, but be honest about why you work. Connect when and how you can with the school or the daycare centre or the kindergarten. Identify other parents in a similar situation. So my eldest, for the first couple of years of elementary school, really struggled with me travelling. And I was one of the few working mothers, or full-time working mothers, in her class, and there was no other children that actually had mothers that travelled and would be absent for 10 days or 2 weeks. And so what I tried to do is really find other parents and therefore work out who their children were that did travel, so that then my daughter could kind of connect with them, or we could talk about what that person was doing, and I'd weave it into conversation so that she felt that it wasn't just me that was doing, that was constantly absent. And, as we talked about, and Chris was saying, be present when present. When she came back, she felt that she was, there and she was on. And create a ritual. So whether that's leaving the office to make sure that twice a week you have dinner with your children. I think Sheryl Sandberg, the CIO of Facebook, is quoted as saying that she leaves the office at 5:30 so that she can make sure that she has dinner with the family, and then she logs on later at night. So I just think all of these things, and for myself, I can't get involved in the school too much during the day, but I try and make sure that I'm volunteering and doing as much as I can at after school and weekend events. So then I thought it's interesting to just kind of move and talk about some of the tips around the different stages. And obviously I'm not sure where you're all at in terms of A, if you have children, B, where, how old your children are. And some of these will overlap, so I might not touch on them all. But I think in the baby years and when you're on your maternity leave, it's always really important to stay connected. And I was really conscious about attending all of our planning days, obviously engaged with my manager at the time, and they approved me to bring my child along or my baby along to the events. I volunteered, so we have an International Education Association of Australia. So during both of my maternity leaves, which was 12 months, I volunteered my time there and made sure that it also helped me stay on top of what was going on in the industry. So it was kind of a bit of a win-win. I just really made sure I focused on establishing networks at that time, and tried to work out, what were valuable networks to have, and trying to build relationships with other working mothers or with males that were also really sympathetic. And I think that's also really important. There are lots of amazing male advocates out there, and I think it's about engaging with them as well, and finding those that are really supportive. And I've been absolutely blessed with an extremely supportive boss who understands the challenges of raising a family and having a senior role. Attend different social events linked to your work, find a mentor, and I guess start planning for your return. I think the toddler years, it's when you probably need to start negotiating with your supervisor about trying to attend a certain number of events over the years. So I say to my children, and they're now in elementary, but it's in the next slide as well, that I will try and get to 2 events per term for them, that are during work hours, and I have agreement from my supervisor that I can kind of have some flexible time around those. But also just asking your grandparents or the children's parents, or your siblings, or even family friends, to be the special person at some events that you can't attend. And just, look at what works for you when you're away. So if you're traveling, like how you set your family up, how you can kind of create your village, and I've got a slide on that as well. And just, again, connecting with other parents and looking at, when you are back at work, just realizing you may not be able to be in the office, for super long hours, but that you can take work home and catch up after kids are asleep. So I talk about the village, and I think this is really critical. And I certainly could not do what I do without my village. And I'm really fortunate. I have amazing neighbours. We have a walking school bus. We all take it in turns in who gets to get to work on time and who's going to be late. We've got nannies or au pairs. I'm not sure of the terminology in the US. My parents are amazing. I've got friends that I know that if I need them to have my kids overnight, because my husband's out the door at 3 a.m. so he can, if I'm away, the kids need to stay somewhere else. There's this whole network that I rely on, and I think it is true that it says, when people say it takes a village to raise a family. The elementary school years, a lot of similar content, I think, to the toddlers, but also just make sure, again, using your village during school holidays. I think that's obviously leave arrangements in many countries haven't caught up to the fact that, we have however many weeks, 12, 16 weeks of school holidays, but, in Australia, 4 weeks of annual leave, and I know it's less in the US. And staying connected when you travel. When I go for anything more than 4 or 5 days, I actually write a letter to my children that they open each morning, and it just gives them a sense that I'm thinking about what they're doing for the day, that they know where I am. They can look at globes or on the internet. And they just, I think, feel that they've got a connection. And obviously FaceTime, I think we're extremely lucky. We're traveling at a time that we are, when I think back 15 years ago or even 5 years ago, that we wouldn't have had access to that. I don't know about in the US, but many of my colleagues seem to think that, or the kids seem to think that on return they'll have a present, and sometimes that's just not possible when you're traveling. So actually I have a stockpile in the house, and my kids don't really care what the present is, but there's just that kind of expectation. So I always kind of go prepared.
It's such a good idea, Bronte, I just have to say. That tip alone.
And half the time, they started saying to me, not another key ring or not another magnet, and that's kind of all you can find. So, I buy them a book or something in advance and it's just easy and they're kind of more grateful, which also says something about kind of their expectations as well. So, yeah. And I think also I'm quite vocal in terms, I'd hope to think in a positive way with the school about how they schedule events. And we've got this classic case that the Father's Day event is often before school or on the weekend, and the Mother's Day event is in the middle of the day. And so kind of just feeding back into the school saying, we're in 2018, events like that should accommodate working mothers as well. So I'm just conscious of time, so I'm going to flick through this. The high school years, sometimes people think the older the children get, the easier it gets or the less present you need to be. But what I hear, and obviously it's not a stage I'm at, it's actually sometimes when you need to be present more, where things can go off the rail more or when it's at the pointy end of study. So trying to maintain really good communication with the school, I think is really critical so you understand what's going on. And perhaps you do need to negotiate your travel arrangements as well. And no surprises here, I think some of the best advice comes from other women. So the quote, just talk to other women. Much of the most useful advice and insights I've had have come from other women. Everyone's journey is different and there are some common themes, and I think that's absolutely true. I think this is really a great quote as well. Highlight the good work that you do. Seek allies who can help highlight it too if you feel you're not being recognised. And I think we still do come across people that have these perceptions around part-time, people working part-time and the value that they have. And so I think if you can have some people that are advocating for you, it's really valuable. So the benefits, I think it would come as no surprise to us, or you'd all be familiar with what the benefits are. You've got improved focus and efficiency. You can retain talent by having flexible work arrangements. You've got greater engagement from staff, and often your part-time parents often have an expanded network because they're actually engaging in the community a lot more and with different views to life. And I think they bring a lot of benefits as well. So I thought this was really interesting, this statistic around the percentage of time wasted in a typical working day, and it was actually women working part-time or contract or in casual roles that appeared to be wasting less time in a day. So I think that's quite a useful stat to have. And quotes that just back that up. I worked more efficiently, managed my time smarter, and became more sharply focused on the work at hand and outcomes while I was there. 80% of employees say that they would stay longer if an employer allows them to work from home. So that goes back to the point around retention. And it's critical that organisations and managers understand the power of flexible modern work arrangements and how important that will be to retain talented staff. So I think that's really important. And it's a way, I think, that you can then recognise, organisations do get recognised for how they support parental leave and part-time work as well. And then you have employees that have this sense of gratitude as well. I'm so thankful that I work in an environment that has a positive culture which supports parents. I could not have asked for more from my employer, and in return I try to work my hardest to ensure that I give back as much as I can to my organisation because of this. Many of us recognise that that sense of gratitude, and that kind of you almost go back, you give back more than possibly what you've been given. And in Australia, Bupa, which is a health insurance company, has identified that flexible working arrangements actually improve the health and well-being and the work-life outcomes of people, and that actually has positive impacts around participation in the workforce as well. So again, really critical for the mental health of your staff, and through that you might see a decline in the number of sick days taken as well. this was, and I couldn't find it. It was actually in Annabelle's Crabb's book, and I couldn't find again the actual who it was attributed to. But it stated that working mothers spend more dedicated time with their kids one-on-one these days than housewives did in the 70s. And so again, coming back to it's the, you know, it's. I did say it's a quality, not the quantity. But again, I think we need to realise that there's a different style of parenting than there was, you know, in previous generations, and that we do engage a lot one-on-one now. And from Australia, the Fair Work Ombudsman, in their report, or their best practice guide on work and family, said the benefits of work and family flexibilities can be achieved in all workplaces, regardless of the size of the business, by developing and implementing family-friendly workplace policies. And I think that's absolutely true. And I think for those organisations that are smaller that try to say it's too hard to juggle this, I think it's trying to work with them to acknowledge that it can be done. And just the final few slides, I just thought as an organisational level, just a few kind of tips or actions that I think can help in accommodating flexible work arrangements and the work-life balance or family work balance, is that when you're recruiting for staff, and, you know, to advertise and to promote employees and also potential employees about the family-friendly working arrangements, both at the recruitment time and also at the induction time. And again, I think institutions and organisations start to develop a reputation, as do managers, around who is flexible and who isn't. You know, where you can provide unpaid leave during school holidays to promote the carers' responsibilities. In Australia, we have something called the 48-52. So while we're paid for 52 weeks of work, generally, we can opt to be paid for 48 weeks and in essence buy ourselves another 4 weeks leave, but that 48 weeks is actually paid over 52 weeks. So you still have the salary. It's not like you're foregoing 4 weeks salary, but it's just you get paid for across 52 weeks for a reduced amount. You know, where you can provide periods of paid parental leave, obviously that goes beyond, that's at an organisational level. And I think it is really time for organisations to be creating meaningful part-time employment opportunities and the job sharing opportunities as well. Establish guidelines about meetings. I try now not to start any meetings before 9:30 that I organise, to try and accommodate people who might be dropping their kids off at school. So most schools in Australia start at 9, or the public sector does, so it allows a bit of time. Often you can drop your kids off a little before that. It allows time for that, and trying to contain them so they're not finishing at 5 o'clock as well, so that people can get home and pick their kids up. And try and make sure you've got technology. I still get astounded at how many organisations don't have technology that support working or remote working. And try and continue to engage with your HR area to try and ensure that policies around, say, start and end times are as flexible as possible. As a supervisor, I think, you know, I touched on then, look at when you hold your meetings and staff development, and make sure that it's during work hours. Ensure that staff on parental leave are kept up to date, and try and, before they commence that leave, try and engage with them and determine and agree on how it is best to engage with them while they're on leave. Try and accommodate flexible working hours where possible. For some roles, it's not possible. I know of some organisations, if their staff members have an hour commute to work on a train, they allow that to be considered work time. So it's really up to your organisation. Set an example and leave on time, and I think that's really critical, and be pretty open about that. I start my work day at 9:30. Most of my team knows that. They also know that I probably am up at 5 o'clock doing an hour of work before I hit the office, and I'm certainly not leaving the office till later, but at least it's an example of saying you can amend your work hours. Be open about your commitments. You know, I think that's really important to your supervisor, to your organisation, but also to your family. And just ensure that all of your staff are aware of the expectations as well. But I think there are still challenges. In this quote, when it came to negotiating flex time, it was awkward and uncomfortable, and I was made to feel as if they were doing me a massive favour. Obviously, as a supervisor or an organisation, we want to try and change that feeling that we might give to our staff, because we've seen that there are plenty of benefits involved. Then I think this quote, my managers have also been very supportive. Even though I'm in a senior role, I think it sets a good example to others and makes sure good practices flow down the line. So again, if you're in a senior role, leading by example, if you can, I think it's fantastic. And I think this is the final one of the final slides that we have. And again, it was from a colleague, and I think this is perfect. And it's kind of what I want to leave you with. I approach life as three balls: family and health are glass, and work is rubber. And I think that's really true, and it goes back a bit to the oxygen mask as well. But if you and your family and your health are not in a good place, everything else kind of will fall apart, as will your work. Whereas work, there's a little more flexibility involved in it. And they're just some references that you can access. And over to questions.
All right, thank you, Bronte. It was just excellent. So, folks, you can put your questions in the question, excuse me, box if you would like, or I think I can do this technologically. If you raise your hand, I can unmute you, and if you wanted to really say something, if you had a comment or a suggestion, the discussion questions again are in that handout. So some of the ones that we thought might be great to share is, if you have a best tip for juggling family and career, does anybody have something that's worked for them that they want to raise their hand and share and be unmuted or put in the chat box? Also, how could we support male employees to be active and engaged fathers? I remember reading a study that said, one of the best things we can do to get more moms really in that workplace fully engaged is to have dads be more involved in those early childcare years, so that it really does seem like it's both parents caring and not just for the mom. So I have one question. So here's a question from Carly Bronte. How do you decide when moving whose career you follow? Oh, wow. What a good question. Flip a coin, right? Flip a coin.
Yeah, look, I think that's it's quite an interesting one, and I think everyone's situation is different. I must admit, I'm with my husband. He's extremely supportive. He also recognises, probably in terms of career opportunities, there are greater opportunities for myself, which then brings broader benefits to our family. And so he's quite willingly kind of accepted, encouraged, I'd actually say probably encouraged for me to pursue my career. And he's an amazing support. He had, I think, 4 kids around last night, taking them to the pool because it's midsummer here, and kind of, entertains the kids and their friends and so forth. But I often think about some of my friends that both of them have what I would call professional careers. So I'd say I'm in a professional career. My husband's probably in a more blue collar type of work. But that juggle when there's 2 of you in professional careers that require 9 to 5. So as I said earlier, my husband's he's out the door at 3 a.m. He starts work by about 4, but he's home by 2. So we have no discussion, no weekly discussion about who's doing what, because it's just known I'm the morning, he's the evening. And if we kind of can't meet that, so if I have early meetings on a morning, it's kind of my role to work out who's going to take my kids to school. And it's quite easy to divide that. But I often think if you've got 2 parents that are 9 to 5, 8 till 6, that's the challenge. But I don't know if I've got any good advice, because I've kind of fell into the situation that I'm in, having met my husband in Japan, and him moving out to Australia. I think in him moving out to Australia, and that was well before we were married, he recognised that it would be myself who would have the career. I don't know, Chris, do you have, I'm not sure about your personal situation or whether there are others on the line. I don't know if Brad is on the line as well. So we've got a couple, I think Dawn and Brad potentially from Australia. So I know you're grateful for the early start this was, but I know Brad's partner wife works as well, whether he's got any comments to add to that or anyone else.
Yeah, I think Brad and Dawn are on the line. So you can chime in if you would love to. I think too, I don't really have advice for that other than I tend to do a very quantitative approach to making decisions where I create a grid that maps out what's important in making this decision and gives it weight, and it comes out with the score at the end, and that's what I do.
Wow.
So, happy to share that with anyone who might want it, but it's very hard to make a value judgment when two people's careers are really important. We have one question. I will share that grid for people who are interested. One question that came through that I think is really interesting from Lauren is, she writes, I find it challenging to think about leaving my organization in search of career progression since I have little kids and I'm already struggling to balance life and a job that I'm comfortable in and have a lot of flexibility in. Do I stay in something comfortable or do I seek growth elsewhere and risk a more difficult work-life balance?
My manager and I often talk about, we talk about this, and we've talked about it over the years as, you know, both of us, you know, I've been with Victoria University now for 12 years. And, you know, I'm very fortunate that I've got a supportive boss and that, you know, there's a lot of opportunities that come my way, and I feel that I'm still developing and my roles have changed quite considerably over that time. One of the things I often think about is the credibility. And I think when you change organizations, you probably have 6 to 12 months where you need to earn your stripes, where you need to build credibility, where you need to build that trust. And so when you've got family that are younger and you're wanting to be present, sometimes I think that's the time to accept that comfortable might actually work for the time in the life that you're at. But again, I think that's a really personal, and I think it depends on whether you're comfortable and still satisfied or you're comfortable but totally dissatisfied. And I think that can change it. But, you know, I've been quite conscious of, you know, different approaches that I've received about job opportunities and the stage in life that my children are in, and whether I'm prepared to, for example, you know, have a role that takes me away for 2 or 3 months of the year, or that I'm going to be expected to be working weekends and so forth. So I think it's just, yeah, you know, I think it's that value assessment as well, what's important to you, and I think also that determination as to how happy and engaged you are in the role.
And I think too, I really like, Bronte, how you broke down the age of the kids, because I think if you can kind of start looking ahead and saying, okay, if I do take this challenge, where are my kids going to be? What are their needs? Is it that time when I'm not nursing anymore, so it will be easier for me to travel? Or, wow, are my kids going into the teenage years and I definitely want to be around on weekends or my house is going to be in trouble, you know? So being able to sort of forecast out and learn from other women to know, is it a good time to make that kind of a move?
Absolutely. And I think also realizing, you know, I start to get a bit impatient, and my mother, who offers extremely sage advice, is like, you have 10, you know, 20, 30 years of working life ahead of you. Just take a couple of years and just make sure that you're all doing as well as you can. You don't need to be progressing. You know, you can progress, but it's not, don't feel that you're kind of, you know, wasting your time being in the same position. And I think that sometimes you feel this sense of urgency, but if you actually, you know, as Chris said, look ahead, You think, well, I've got 20, 25, 30 years to achieve that. So I can be comfortable for a year or two.
Yeah. A woman named Nikki asked if you could bring the resources slide back up to the
Sure.
screen, Bronte, just so we can make sure. And we'll be sending, this recording will live in the membership section of the League website, so you'll be able to access it as well.
And a copy of the presentation?
Yeah, absolutely. A PDF of the presentation is also included. I know sometimes it's really hard to listen to a presentation you've already listened to once. And Kenneth had a comment about a tip, I guess. This is great. We have our first best tip for juggling family and careers. Empower your kids. My kids are 8 and 10, she writes. So this year I had to really make time to teach them to start doing laundry, preparing simple meals, mopping, vacuuming, and dishwashing. I had to break the habit of trying to do it all myself. That's a great point.
Absolutely.
And it's teaching them great skills.
Absolutely, and it's amazing. I think sometimes we underestimate what the children are capable of, or what they also understand and can kind of digest. And I think that empowerment and that independence is invaluable. I have this classic where my children, when they say to me, I'm hungry, and I now say to them, that's a problem. You need to come to me with a solution. So come with 2 or 3 different options that you want to eat, and have a think about ones that are, you know, likely to be kind of, don't come with chocolate, you know, ice cream and something else. Come with ones that are likely to be kind of okay. But again, just changing that mindset so that I'm not the problem solver, that they need to try and think about what the options are and actually give some thought to it.
One of the questions we had asked on the discussion question, and again, folks, this is a great thing, even to talk about at your workplaces, your friends, was different practices to support male employees to be active and engaged as well. And I think one thing that is to think about, and I don't know what you have at Victoria University, Bronte, but to have a parental leave policy rather than a maternity leave. And so right away, both men and women or gender neutral folks have the same opportunities to be engaged in taking care of their children. I don't know if you have that where you're at.
Ours is parental leave, so it's linked to the primary carer. So as long as there is supporting documentation that someone is the primary carer, which I think is generally just a statutory declaration, that they're entitled to the same amount of leave. And I think that I think is really, really positive. And then we're seeing, I saw somewhere recently, there's an engineering firm that's now giving 12 weeks annual leave to their employees, and on the condition that those 12 weeks is taken during school holidays. And again, trying to encourage both men and women to take that leave as well. And I think PricewaterhouseCoopers has late last year, certainly in Australia, and I'm not sure if it's the same in the US, that parental leave is available from the day you join. So again, so if there is a male or a gender neutral, anyone that's partner is actually raising a young child, that they can actually take some parental leave as well from the start, and that it doesn't have to wait for 12 months as well. So I think that's really, there's some positive developments occurring.
Absolutely. Do you want to move on to the very last slide, Bronte, where we have some...
Back on that one.
Yeah, so sort of in closing, a few things. One, we've got a lot of resources as a League member. I want to, almost all of you on the webinar today are League members. There are resources, coaching tips, places where you can put in your resume, get your LinkedIn profile looked at if you're thinking about a career transition and you haven't looked at it in a while. There's mentoring 4x4s where you can join a group of women who might be mostly women, men are welcome too, where we're talking about these types of issues. And certainly we do educational programming such as today with Bronte. Also, in terms of upcoming league events, I wanted to make you aware of. Dawn Hewitt, I know, is a new board member, and she's here on this webinar. She's a new board member of the Global Leadership League, and she will be at API in Singapore on March 28th. So if you go to globalleadershipleague.com/events, you're going to see that event that you can sign up for if you happen to be going to API. At AIEA in DC, if any of you folks are going there, that Monday, we've got one of the vice presidents of She Should Run, which is an organization dedicated to getting more women involved in politics. At 11 o'clock, just 4 blocks from the center at the Greenberg House of Syracuse University, she is speaking about how we can get more involved or encourage people to get involved. And then we have a workshop on blazing your career path at the Forum on Education Abroad on March 20th in Boston. So connect with us, fill out the survey at the end of this webinar. And I see Brad is looking, he's answering you. I think it takes a while for all that information to come from Australia. But Brad Doherty, who's one of the only men on the line, I want to make sure he gets his time, says in terms of how he and his wife Jackie, who are two full-time working professionals, an initial challenge is to employ males. They have 12 staff, only 1 male, and attracting males to CS Australia in the industry is an initial challenge. And so getting more males in the workplace engaged in these sessions, right? How do we get more men and women? Because it's a win-win for all of us. Thanks, Brad, for that. And Dawn says good morning, and she's glad to be here. So with that, I'll conclude. We only have a couple minutes left. Fill the survey out at the end of this. Let us know what other types of programs you would like. And Bronte, just a hearty thank you for being a great mother. It has been so wonderful to see your kids on as we've practiced this, and for taking time away from a busy life to really help the rest of us balance these two wonderful roles.
It's great to meet you all virtually. If anyone is at API, I'll certainly be there, and I'd love to meet you in person. And thank you so much to Chris as well for coordinating this and dealing with all the time zones and so forth. And just, yeah, it's fantastic to see an organisation like this, and with Dawn leading it in Australia, and people like Brad being so supportive as well. So I think it's fabulous. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Bronte. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.